Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Sharps. Welcome to the world of the mind. This series is going to focus on how the mind and brain operate, on how ideas of the mind and brain have come into being and changed over time, and also on the extremes, what happens when a human mind and human brain are pushed by circumstance to a point where the functioning of that mind changes. We're also going to have a series, three-part series, for students on better study techniques based in scientific psychology and on aspects of career selection and things of that nature. So in general, we're going to be looking at a variety of topics in the mind. Okay? And I'll be your guide through most of this. I'm a professor of experimental psychology, specifically cognitive science and forensic cognitive science. I've been doing this since before the dinosaurs invented dirt, about 45 years. And I've also served as a consulting investigative psychologist on a number of crimes, a number of criminal investigations. I've published or presented about 300 odd papers on cognitive psychology. I've published 4 books on it. And again, I've been doing this for the better part of half a century. I'm still not bored. There's a tremendous amount to be understood here, and we really want to get at that. And the question is, well, where would we want to begin? Yeah? Well, a logical place to begin is in the world of perception. We see the world around us, we hear the world around us. How does that work? And the first thing most people are going to think is, why would you need a psychology of that? I mean, here's blue things, here's red things. You see them or you don't. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Here's music, here's a squealing pig. One is pleasant, the other is not, unless you want pork chops. And so you get the general idea, okay? There doesn't seem to be any room for psychology there. But in fact, there is, very strongly. Consider human development. We're going to do a whole episode of the world of the mind on this subject. But the fact of the matter is, babies and very young children see the world very differently than you do. Very young children, babies, don't even see space the way you do. The idea that you're going to avoid going over a cliff. A baby, if it could manage to roll over the cliff, might very well do so. Where we are in our development really changes the nature of perception, of what we see, what we can see. You say, well, okay, fair enough, but that's fairly obvious. A baby's brain isn't very developed yet, and a young child's isn't either. Again, we'll be seeing this in a future episode of this series. There's more to it than just developmental time, where you are in the developmental trajectory of your life. There's also, as we're going to see, the nature of interpretation, of how thinking actually influences what we perceive and what we think we perceive. And of course, what kind of creature we are makes a huge difference. Now think about it. Human beings can't see into the ultraviolet. They're very limited what part of the electromagnetic spectrum we can actually see. Now, honeybees can see quite nicely into the ultraviolet. They have to be able to distinguish the different flowers they eat. Whole variety of deer-like things, okay? Plant-eating animals can also see into the ultraviolet because they have to make distinctions among plants that might be toxic or plants that are edible that humans generally don't have to make. Okay? These animals need these abilities, and they're completely closed to us. We can't see into the ultraviolet, okay? So apparently the deer and the antelope, who are generally engaged in playing or whatever it is, apparently they're better at this sort of bees. My God, bees' brains, little 3 bits there. The bottom bit just basically controls the mouth, for heaven's sake. So bees can see better than we can. Really? Let's go back to these deer. There are a variety of deer-like forms in India and southern Asia that are preyed on by tigers. Okay, which is a nasty thing to have happen. Okay? Tigers usually don't eat people, by the way. There's a long-standing legend that tigers don't like what we taste like. I don't know how anybody figured that out. Maybe they asked a tiger. I have no idea. But the point is, they don't usually go after us. They generally, if a tiger does eat you, it's a good bet it's an abnormal tiger. So you got that going for you. But they do go after these deer and things. If you think about it, isn't it kind of stupid to be colored the way a tiger is? I mean, the black stripes, that's not bad. Black stripes is good camouflage. In World War II, American tanks were basically a dull green. Well, they started spraying black stripes on them, too, for nice camouflage. So black stripes, good black stripes. The rest of the damn tiger is orange. Now, you might like it as a decorator color, but as a camouflage color, it doesn't seem to be operating too well, does it? Okay, why in God's green earth would something that preys on deer be basically waving, highway alert signs at the deer? Right? Hey, I'm orange. It doesn't make it. Well, they're not. The way various deer-like forms' eyes are arranged they don't see color the way we do. Yes, they can see into the ultraviolet, but for these animals, orange is not a color they can perceive. They appear to perceive orange as a kind of a dull green. For us, a tiger is very clearly a big orange and black thing, and if he does eat you, he's abnormal. So again, we've got that going for us. But for the deer, that mighty warning sign of orange tigerness isn't there at all. It's camouflaged more or less the way an American Army tank was at the end of World War II. Different kinds of creatures are operating really in a kind of terrifying evolutionary race, really, between the predator and the prey. What can you see? What can't you see? Well, I have to be able to see the flowers. I have to be able to tell what I'm eating or what I'm sucking the pollen on. But that tends to rob me of the ability to notice that it's a damn tiger, okay? And these things go very far in the world of hearing, okay? There are several dimensions of hearing. And we'll talk a bit about more specific perceptual ideas much later in this series. For a moment, we're taking kind of an overview. Hearing is based on, there's a psychological experience of sound called timbre or timbre, okay? There is also amplitude, loud sounds. Sound is based on waving, isn't it? Waving in the air, usually. If you're underwater, the sound underwater is because of the waving in the water, okay? You don't get any sound in outer space. It's a vacuum. There's nothing to wave. But in the air, you get these waves, don't you? Well, amplitude is how big the wave is. You can see this in a pond or something. You drop a pebble, gives you a little bitty wave. Drop a brick, gives you a big damn wave. Okay, it's the same thing. And the ear is rigged to hear the louder amplitude. The larger amplitude is a louder sound. Okay, that makes perfect sense. But there's another dimension too: frequency. How many of the little waveforms are packed into every second? Okay. And that's where we see something very, very interesting. Human beings can hear up to about 20,000 cycles per second. The cycle per second is called a hertz, after the scientist who was involved in this kind of measurement. Okay, but 20,000 cycles per second is pretty good. Okay, take frogs, for example. We're a lot better at hearing in this higher range than frogs are, although, damn it all, it turns out, very recent research, the frogs are actually capable of hearing in a range far above the range in which we can hear. It's extremely interesting. There's several different peaks, really, in their ability to hear. But so much for frogs. You don't have to worry too much about frogs, because let's face it, you don't usually talk to them, do you? You do talk to your cat. A lot of people talk to cats. That's fine to talk to cats. I talk to cats, too. The problem comes in when you think the cat is talking back. But cats can hear several tens of thousands of hertz higher than human beings can at different levels of efficiency. Okay? And sometimes they communicate that way too. This has been demonstrated especially in kittens, that this kind of ultrasonic, well beyond human hearing sounds cats can make, sounds cats can hear. It does exist. Okay? Now, if you take mating cats, okay, well, yeah, you can usually hear that, can't you? There's a lot of howling and screaming right under your window, usually at 4 o'clock in the morning. But it's perfectly possible. It's never really been demonstrated for sure. And again, this has mainly been observed in kittens. But all these people have their cat who's staring at the wall. They think the cat, Mrs. Fluffkins here, is seeing ghosts. Well, they may not be looking at a damn ghost at all. It may simply be listening to another cat on the other side of the wall screaming at a frequency you can't hear, okay? And, of course, what it would be screaming about is filthy, perverted cat sex. That's why your cat is so interested. Again, almost all adult cat communications, obviously, you can hear it. And, again, you certainly hear it a lot at 4 o'clock in the morning. But the fact is that cats are capable, their kittens are capable of hearing things in a universe of sound that's completely closed to us. But there are things that hear even higher sounds than cats can. Bats are putting out so much energy into their sounds that it functions as a kind of sonar. Okay, the bat is actually bouncing these wonderful beams of sound off of bugs that are flapping around up there and managing to grab them. Okay, there are some types of bats, they hit the bug with over 100,000 hertz of sound. Okay, and the bugs have evolved to detect that, and the bugs drop. And some kinds of bats then fly like this: beep, boom, they get the bug. Okay, so at this point, the bugs have to drop back 20 and punt. There's constant race going on. But where you see this at an extraordinary degree level, and extraordinary alteration of the living creature to deal with the perception, is in whales. Okay? If you take a model of a juvenile California gray whale. They're off the coast here at various seasons of the year. Okay, well, it's a pretty thing. Human beings love whales. We go watch them, don't we? Okay, and this is a baleen whale. The California gray whale tends to be an animal that feeds in coastal waters. I mean, they can do other things, obviously, but they tend to feed mostly in coastal waters. And what they eat, they're a baleen whale, which means they have lots of brushiness in their face, okay? And they just open their mouth, and they go swimming through the plankton, and they eat all these damn plankton, and it's got a nice peaceful spectacle, isn't it? The whale's kind of just going along, and we see the whale doing this from the whale watching boats. When we look at these wonderful animals, they're just out there peacefully eating the plankton. If only we could commune with the whales. Of course, that's what we're perceiving, isn't it? We're seeing this wonderful animal, or its mom, this is a juvenile here. We're seeing this wonderful animal going along through the water. Think about what the plankton are thinking. Oh my God, don't eat us. There are millions of us. We all have families. And the whale's going, I will destroy you all. It's like Darth Whale. Now, granted, plankton don't have families, and they don't really scream. And if they did, it probably wouldn't be falsetto. But if you could perceive this creature from the standpoint of a plankton, your response would be raw terror, raw hatred. The response of humans on the whale watching boat is, wow, look at that. Let's get this picture. But why bring it up at all? Well, whales are capable of producing incredibly loud noises. Blue whales are an astonishing noise that can be heard for perhaps hundreds, even estimates are a bit high here, but a tremendous distance across the ocean, okay? The sound, a lot of these sounds are so high we can't hear them, okay? So this animal is capable of producing some amazing sound with this little head. It's only a quarter as long as the animal is. But look at this model here. This is a juvenile sperm whale. And you immediately notice a big difference, don't you? This juvenile gray whale, this baleen whale, the head's only about a little less than a quarter of its body length, I would guess. This sperm whale, the head is almost half as long as the body. Now what's going on here? Well, sperm whales aren't baleen whales. They are toothed whales. Like killer whales, except these things are a hell of a lot bigger than killer whales, orcas, okay? A hell of a lot bigger. It's like a killer whale that goes to the gym, right? And these animals do not prey on plankton in coastal waters. Generally, they can dive quite deep. It's a shallow water kind of thing, preying on your prey. This thing goes down thousands of feet under the water, and it preys on relatively large creatures. There are actually cases in which giant squid have been found in the stomachs of sperm whales. Okay? That's an extraordinary thing to be able to do, because under several thousand feet of water, the water pressure is so incredibly intense. The physics are quite different than anything we're used to on land, or even scuba diving. Okay? Way down, orders of magnitude below where a scuba diver is going to be going. What's up with the giant head? Well, it turns out that the giant head and a kind of substance in the skull are allowing this animal to have an astonishing ability to hear the world around it, okay, at very high frequencies we couldn't hear at all. But this animal, in complete pitch darkness, thousands of feet under the sea, is capable of making this amazing auditory picture, to the point that it apparently can wrestle a giant squid into submission. Okay? There used to be an idea. One of the things we know about these animals, too, from a juvenile whale that was captured some years ago and then released to the sea, it works both ways. They can produce a tremendous burst of sound out the front. There's an old theory that possibly that was being weaponized. They were possibly able to shout bang, and the squid would go belly up and the whale would get calamari. Most marine biologists today doubt this very sincerely. There were experiments done where a tank full of fish, they played the whale's greatest hits of the fish, and the fish didn't explode, so we've got that going for us. But ultimately, there's still some question as to why this animal can produce that tremendous burst. You really want to duplicate the conditions completely before you completely reject that idea. But at the end of the day, virtually no marine biologist today endorses that idea that was running around all over the place a few decades ago. Oh yeah, the whales are down there shouting boom, getting calamari. You see why in our series here, The Worlds of the Mind, we're going to talk about the ideas as well as the mind and brain itself, because the ideas change. They change decade by decade. They change century by century. And it's so important to understand that. But what the shape of your head is, what kind of creature you are, what kind of thing you eat, how deep you dive to eat it, all of these are factors that change the nature of what we can perceive at all. It's not just this is blue, this is red. For animals that are essentially colorblind, most of your large predators are essentially colorblind, land predators, the different colors don't have the same perceptual effect on them, do they? A deer is looking at a tiger. You're looking at, oh my God, it's a big orange thing with black stripy bits. And the deer is looking at it going, what the hell is it? Because it looks like green and black. And as we see then, what kind of creature you are kind of interacts with your interpretive powers. The human being today looks at the whale and goes, what a wonderful, beautiful animal. A century and a half ago, the human looked at the whale and went, wow, what a wonderful source of clean burning lamp oil. And if plankton could talk, they would be going, oh my God, here comes Darth Whale. Okay, it's trying to kill everybody. So at the end of the day, we have to figure out how these things interact and under what circumstances. And here's really what's happening. We've already mentioned the fact, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail later, that developmental factors change our perception and, as we're going to see in this series, our thinking, our memory, and our emotion. It's a kind of time, isn't it? Because you go through your developmental trajectory. Humans live 70-odd years. Some kinds of birds live 2 or 3 years. But whatever your general life pathway is, developmental things will be important to you. But so is experiential time. You've been listening to me go on about this stuff for a few minutes, and that's experience that you didn't have a few minutes ago. So that kind of time, normal time. But there's another kind of time. I'm going to mention this again in this session today. Evolutionary time. Before humans invented agriculture, one of the most important things they do was hunting. Many populations during the last ice age, we found the diet was, the majority was meat. So hunting was an awfully important skill, wasn't it? But what's the most difficult part of hunting cognitively? Well, that would be perceiving and understanding tracks, track perception, track memory, really. So maybe we should have animal tracks. Maybe we should be born with memories of animal tracks, so to speak. We should be able to recognize a mastodon or a saber-toothed tiger. But that wouldn't work, would it? Because those creatures have been extinct for thousands of years. That would basically wind up being a waste of brain space. But what might we want in our head to be born with? That would be the ability to learn animal tracks. Well, we did a series of experiments on this with modern urban college students, most of whom had had nothing to do with hunting or tracking or animals or frankly even being outside. And yet with these intensely urban people, we still found them able to learn animal tracks about 3 times more effectively than other stimuli. We have retained, even in modern times, and most of us don't use it, an ability to learn animal tracks easily. What else might we want to be able to do in the ancient world? Well, certainly before you invent cops, you want to avoid people who are trying to kill you. What else would you want to have had in your head back in the day before you invent cops? Well, one of the things you want in your head before you invent cops is you want to avoid the serial killers. But how do you know who they are? Well, how do our primate relatives tell very much about each other? Well, if you look at chimpanzees, for example, some other primates, they do an awful lot of anogenital sniffing. Now, you can do that if you want to, but I don't suggest you tell anybody. Life is tough enough already. But the fact is, it's not going to work that well because the human olfactory sense just isn't very good, is it? Okay. Now, various animals, our primate relatives, do use visual cues. If you're a female chimpanzee and it's the time when you're fertile and you're feeling a bit frisky, what happens is your backside bloats up to the size of really a small postal facility. It's very, very large. And then you basically paint it physiologically, either pink or lavender. It's kind of like a gigantic sign that says, get it here, okay? And the male chimps get very interested in the way it goes. But humans, that way of communicating is closed to us for 2 reasons. First is we are cursed, as a species, we are cursed with blandly monochromatic buttocks. Second is we tend to wear pants. I'm in favor of pants, hope you are too. But ultimately, how do we communicate unless it's going to be verbal? Because nobody comes up with this, hi there, I'm a serial killer. Well, maybe they do, but maybe they get popular. Maybe they're on YouTube. I don't know. But generally, that's something you want to conceal. But do you know how humans communicate a hell of a lot? In the eyes. All the poets go on and on about that. Her eyes were wild. Okay, you see things in the eyes. Yeah, well, is it really true? The eyes are very, very well innervated. Lots of nerves now. You can move them around in interesting ways. But I got interested in this, so I got pictures, photographs of serial killers and of people who weren't serial killers, ordinary people off the internet. And we get these eyes, get these pictures. So it's just from here, the upper part of the zygomatic, lower part of the supraorbital torus, right here, between the eyebrows and the cheekbone. Just the eyes, that's all they were looking at. And we show these pictures of eyes of serial killers mixed in with ordinary people one at a time. We discovered something. The average person, none of our subjects, research respondents, none of our respondents recognized any of these people as serial killers. They had no idea who they were. They did not know they were anything. They just ordinary people. But compared to the real ordinary people, the serial killers, our respondents, didn't like them. They didn't trust them, didn't want to be around them, okay? Other indices that we didn't wind up publishing, they didn't want to work with them or for them. They just did not want to be around them. They didn't know why. But it was in the eyes. Now, until we published these papers, one about 20 years ago, one quite recently, I do a monthly blog for Psychology Today, the magazine. It's called The Forensic View. The very first one I did several years ago, it's called The Ancient World and the Murderer's Eyes. You can read all about it. It takes about 4 minutes to read that brief summary of our longer article. But ultimately, it turns out that we have a track learning module, compartment, whatever you want to call it, a track learning system in our head, and apparently a system for detecting serial killers. Now, how well does it work to other classes of criminal type people, or people who want to do bad things to you? That we do not know yet. But until we did these things, until we did these experiments, nobody knew these things existed at all. Now, of course, there's lots of ways to interpret any given result, aren't there? Right now, there's a huge kerfuffle about climate change, and many people are interpreting it one way, many people are interpreting it in another way, okay? But interpretation is even more variable than perception, and the seeing and hearing. We've been talking about the whales and the dolphins and the tigers eating their prey and all that good stuff. Interpretation. We're going to talk about that quite a bit, both in the ideas stream and in the mind stream. But there's going to be a bit of it, to say the least, in the extremes content stream of the world of the mind. Because consider UFOs. Now, for many, many years, of course, government said there are no UFOs. They're calling them UAPs now. It's fun to keep changing the letters. But there aren't any, and they're not dangerous, and they're basically all swamp gas or weather balloons, because nobody wanted you to believe that the military couldn't protect you from the Martians or whatever. Today, it's certainly going to distract people from their everyday problems, right? The military is saying, yes, there are UAPs all over the place. It's really wonderful. Well, there's lots of unidentified flying objects. I've seen quite a few of them. In my case, they're usually birds, but they count as unidentified because I don't know any of those birds personally. That may be stretching the definition a bit, but what the hell? UFOs? Are they real? Are they filled with aliens? Or are they inside the world of the mind? Not the world of the mind that interacts with the world around you, with whales, whether you interpret them as beautiful animals, wonderful examples of evolution, or wonderful examples of God's creation. You hear that. Or murderous serial killers. Yes, I'm Darth Whale. I shall eat all the plankton. The plankton going, no. The whale's going, ah. Okay. Kind of depends how you interpret the whale, don't it? Okay. Well, sometimes perception interacts with interpretation. In what way? Well, you have in your eyes rods and cones. Now that's a bit of a kerfuffle because we now know that whether a cell functions as a rod or cone isn't really dependent on whether it's shaped like a rod or shaped like a cone. It's more dependent on where it is in the eye, how the nerves are set up. It's a very, very interesting, very complex system. But in general, rod cells don't take as much light as cone cells. You can only see black and white with rod cells because they don't take as much light. They don't have quite the visual acuity of cone cells. And the rod cells tend to be toward the periphery, toward the outside of your visual field. The cone cells are more toward the center, and they take a lot of light, which is why at night the cone cells really aren't working very well, to say the least. And the darker it is, the worse they work as a general rule. But the cone cells can see color. That's easy to remember for students. CO for cone, CO for color. but they're more centrally located. You can see better when you're looking straight out front, okay? And at night, in the lady, if you don't have artificial lights, they basically go off duty. If you're, go to a party in the evening and they say it's in a greenhouse and all the houses look gray, that's because your rod cells are what's on duty. Excuse me. Well, so what? The rod cells are more toward the periphery and the cone cells are more toward the middle. Now, if you look up in the sky, depending how much pollution there is, you may not see anything at all. But if you get up a little above the pollution, or you live in the country, you may see stars, right? The lights shining through from heaven, which at some times have been how these gigantic balls of blowing up hydrogen have been interpreted. But if you happen to see the constellation of Orion, it's a wonderful one. It's got the 3 in a row stars there. Some people think the pyramids were designed to mimic the positions of the 3 stars. Who knows? But anyway, the Orion, the 3 stars. If you look under the star that's farthest over here to the left, you see a little smudgy bit underneath it. Now, that's the Orion Nebula. It's several gazillion tons of exploding hydrogen and helium manages to look small and slightly damp, okay? Well, you notice that out of the corner of your eye. So what do? Habitually, we tend to look, right, wherever our best vision is, and that's right in the center. We look at the Orion Nebula with our cones, and it's gone. Why is it gone? Because it doesn't put off enough light to be seen through the cones. Now, I personally, mountain climbing between, say, 12 and 14,000 feet, you can look straight at the Orion Nebula, and you can see the damn thing. There isn't that much air between you and it. But you get down to where I live, about 1,300 feet, you can sort of make it out, but not very well. It's sort of your imagination. But if you look away, there it is, okay? And down lower, you can see it vaguely out of the corner of your eye, but when you look at it, it's gone. Now, why? Because the atmosphere is interfering with your ability to make that perception, because the rod cells can see it almost, depending on how high you are in altitude, right? They can almost see it because they don't need as much light, and you focus your cone cells on it, and the damn thing is gone. Okay, so fair enough. It makes perfect sense in terms of psychology, physics, and astronomy. But suppose that ain't your mental set. Suppose you're not a science type of person. Suppose you are a person who watches a heck of a lot of, star things, and you watch all these wonderful alien programs that are on for several days every week. It's amazing just how much this alien stuff we get in our heads. Well, it's pretty obvious what it is, isn't it? It's pretty obviously disappearing when you look at it. It is very clearly a Klingon starship with the Romulan cloaking device. Now, why would they be engaging it only when you are looking at it? Possibly they intend to probe you. Now, quoting from the wonderful Simon Pegg and Dick Frost movie, Paul, where the alien says something like, why the hell would I want to do that? It's a very interesting question, why they would want to probe you, but it's going to be obviously quite unpleasant. And if you're really concerned with this, oh my God, it's the spaceship, it's there. It's gone. It's back. You begin to see I could have some serious problems with that. Now, I don't want to say the word cured, but when I was working in a psychiatric hospital, a gentleman who was, in fact, psychotic had the delusion the space aliens were after him. I got him to stop believing that by just explaining, when he was in a relatively lucid period, just by explaining this thing about Orion to him, and how, no, it's a star, it's not a problem. Didn't do him much good. He was delusional. He then decided that he was an astronomer, and he spent a lot of time explaining astronomy to the nurses. Since he didn't actually know any astronomy, the nurses are going, my God, you've made him even more boring than he was, and the nurses did not love me as a result. But in fact, there was a certain level of dislike, as I recall. But point being, the whole world changes. The world of the mind. The real world's still out there. Okay, there's birds, there's dirt, there's corned beef hash. But these things are interpreted differently, aren't they? Some people like getting dirty. Think about people who love to go out on their dirt bikes on the weekend. They get filthy. They have a wonderful time out there, okay? Other people don't like getting dirty at all. Birds, they're very pretty. They make pleasant sounds. You ever had a damn bird squawking all frickin' dawn while you're trying to get some sleep because you're up too late? Okay? The birds have different values, don't they? Corned beef hash. I like it. I even like the corned beef hash that I cook. Most people seem to hate corned beef hash, and people have told me that my own cooking, especially corned beef hash, tastes like pure evil. So we interpret things, don't we? And if you have a scientific way of looking at the world, you interpret the stars as stars, and the Orion Nebula, a great birthplace of stars. It's an amazing, gigantic, wonderful formation way out there in deep space. Suddenly becomes a damn Klingon starship with a cloaking device. Now, if I'm going to talk on and on about the UFOs and the flying saucer people and stuff, though, I suppose I really should, in full disclosure, discuss my own UFO experience. Still haunts me. No, it doesn't. But well, anyway, point being, what was my UFO experience? I was right back here outside my house, okay? And I was looking up in the night sky here, and down on the horizon was a big ball. Looked like a big, brilliant ball. And I'm thinking to myself, it's probably a planet. It must be a planet. See, well, that's weird. It's too big for a planet. It's a little dim, too big for a planet. It's kind of fuzzy. It's kind of twinkling like a star does. I mean, that's very, very strange. I'm thinking, I'm seeing a UFO. Wonderful. So I sit down out there, okay, on my patio. It changed. Suddenly, it had a big dent in one side. Now, if you ever watched, I think it's Star Wars, you know what we're seeing there. The Death Star has opened its force field and its gate, probably to allow shuttlecraft in, okay? And so I'm looking at this, I'm kind of laughing to myself, ha, ha, ha. I wonder if they're a shuttlecraft. I wonder what's going on. There they were. 2 tiny, bright lights, okay? And as I watched, one of them seemed to move into the crescent here, the open part of the ball, and disappeared, I assume, as it got into the force field. The other one went straight up. Now, if you watch the amazing alien programs and stuff, you'll have some witness saying, and I know it wasn't any kind of aircraft because it went straight up. We got nothing in the inventory that goes straight up. Here are rockets. They go straight up, okay? However, the direction I'm looking from the Central Sierras toward Fresno, California, there aren't many rockets there until somebody invents, a rocket ship that has a tractor engine that's fueled by grapes. Okay, I'm afraid the Fresno space program will remain in its infancy. Okay, but helicopters? No, they really don't. If you watch them at night, they're doing this kind of little shimmy thing as they go up. They don't go straight up. But my shuttlecraft, right? My space lifeboat from this giant Death Star went straight up. What the hell's going on? The single thing that's most mistaken for a flying saucer or whatever is the planet Venus. And that's what I was looking at. Why didn't it look like Venus? Because it was being reflected through this kind of semi-permanent pesticide cloud over there in the agricultural region down there. It was being magnified by a very variable, basically magnifying glass made out of gas. That's why it was a little dim and too big and it's shimmery. Okay, this is planet Venus looked at through atmospheric conditions. Now, what happened when I sat down? If you went to 8th grade or sometimes 9th grade, remember those diffraction gradients? You turned them with the light going along the bench and you could make the different shapes look different. You observe a solar eclipse on the ground, the sun going through leaves and things. It's just a question of shading. And on my property, there happened to be 2 trees on line with Venus at that time. Well, why did it look round at first? Because I sat down. Why didn't you see the trees? Because it was dark. The trees gave me a diffraction pattern. I could prove it because when I stood back up, the damn thing got round again. Now, as to the shuttlecraft, well, there was something a little strange going on. I was looking basically directly in the direction of the Fresno airport. What was strange was there were 2 small aircraft apparently about to land there, okay? And you could see their little lights. But even from my perspective, they were too close together. Now, I've talked to actual pilots, people who know about airplanes and everything, okay? And apparently when that happens, it happens quite often. I've got 2 little model airplanes here, same general type. When that happens, when they get too close together, the tower will often order one to a higher altitude and may order the other one just to get the hell out of the place entirely if they have enough space and Fresno Airport often does. If they have enough space, they'll just have it circle around, come back around. So what did I actually see? Here's the airplane that disappeared. Now watch what happens when the tower orders it to fly out of the pattern. It flies farther and farther into the pesticide until I can't see it. Understand, since I'm watching it this way, I don't see its motion away from me. I just see the linear component of that motion. Now, what about the other aircraft? They order it to a higher elevation. Well, if it's doing this, right, well, we can all see it, right? It's doing the hypotenuse of a right triangle. But suppose it's flying directly away from or directly toward me. At night, I don't see this motion. I only see this motion. It looks like it's going straight up. Sad. I'm afraid that I didn't see the Death Star or the shuttlecraft or even the Klingons. What I saw was the planet Venus under fairly typical for that part of the world atmospheric conditions through a couple of trees and a couple of small aircraft that were in fact being ordered around by a control tower. That's all I saw. But suppose instead of having the nasty scientific mind I tend to, suppose I was one of these people who really, I desperately need to believe, and I need to be one of the believers, that wonderful poster from the X-Files years ago, I want to believe. Suppose I want to believe, and I go to the conferences, and I go to this and that, and I meet with other believers. We're going to talk about that in the mind as we see how other people's opinions, how other people influence us. What am I going to see? I'm going to see the Death Star and the shuttlecraft. And as I get more and more invested in that viewpoint, it's going to get harder and harder for anybody to shake my beliefs. This may turn me in directions that are not profitable for my life. We're going to talk more about that as we go. Interpretation is critical. What we perceive is critical. And all of these things come through three major sources, come from three major sources as we pass through three kinds of time: evolutionary, developmental, and experiential. And as we see this, we need to understand how the mental processes, the processes of the brain itself operate. We need to see how they operate in social contexts and at different times in our development, and with reference to different times, different kinds of worlds that our ancestors lived in, that through the forces of natural and sexual selection wound up in their genomes, in our genomes. We have a serial killer detector apparently somewhere in our head. People with no experience or interest in animals still can learn the animal tracks. And all these factors can contribute very strongly to the extremes. These will be the major topics that we'll be focusing on here at the World of the Mind. I'm Dr. Matthew Sharps. Hope you will subscribe